My best friend had been sleeping with my wife for 6 months while I was working pipeline projects in Fort McMurray. I came home, early one Tuesday in February, found his jacket on my front hook, and spent the next 30 days taking apart everything he'd spent 6 years building. Quietly, systematically, completely. By the time he understood what was happening, there was nothing left to save. They thought I was too reliable to look closely. They thought my work schedule was protection. They were wrong about everything, except the work schedule. And that's the thing that actually got them. I haven't told anyone the full version of this until now. Need to get it out. My name is Barrett. I'm 34, and until 3 months ago I had what most people would describe as a solid life. Senior project manager at a geotechnical engineering firm. The kind of company that handles infrastructure contracts for municipal governments and energy developers across Alberta and into BC. Good work, well compensated, the kind of job that earns a certain amount of respect at dinner parties, before people realize they don't quite understand what geotechnical means and move on. I didn't mind. I've never needed a room to know what I do. I just needed to do it well. My wife, Gwen, was a pediatric occupational therapist at the Alberta Children's Hospital. She worked with kids who had sensory processing issues, motor delays, developmental challenges. Spent her days helping 6-year-olds learn to button their shirts or manage a classroom without falling apart. It's demanding work. It requires exactly the kind of patience and careful observation that I'd always admired in her. We met at a New Year's Eve party 7 years ago, through a mutual friend I've since completely lost touch with. Married 18 months later. Our daughter, Nell, turned 6 in December, sharp, stubborn, obsessed with any animal that lives in the ocean. Completely unbothered by the world's opinions of her. She is genuinely the best thing either of us has ever done. My best friend had been my best friend since second year at the University of Calgary. We met on an intramural hockey team and stayed close after graduation through the particular inertia of good friendship. The kind where you don't have to work at it, where you just keep showing up, and it keeps being easy. He was in business, I was in engineering, and he was always the louder and more charming of the two of us, which meant people noticed him first and relied on me second. And we both understood this without it ever needing to be said. 6 years ago he told me he wanted to open a craft brewery on 17th Avenue. He called me before he called anyone else. He had the concept, the space, a business plan that was mostly optimism held together with spreadsheet formatting, and a gap in his startup capital. I co-signed his first business loan, $42,000. I didn't hesitate for a single day. He built it into something real over those 6 years. A proper tap room, a small canning line, seasonal releases that got written up in the local food press, a following on social media. He was proud of it the way I was proud of my work. Quietly but completely. I'd made the investor introductions that funded his expansion round. 2 were former colleagues of mine. 1 was a family friend who put in $20,000. Because he trusted me when I told him my best friend was worth it. I trusted my best friend completely. Right up until I didn't. The signs had been accumulating since the previous summer, and I had been doing what I always do with anything that doesn't fit cleanly into a project plan, filing it away, marking it inconclusive, moving. My wife started being protective of her phone. In small ways, the screen angling slightly when she texted, the device going to the bathroom with her at 10 p.m. when she used to just leave it on the nightstand. Once I asked who she was messaging, and she said a colleague, and looked back at her screen in the particular way that ends a conversation. I let it end. She had never given me a reason not to trust her. I didn't want to be the kind of person who manufactured reasons. My best friend started appearing in her weekly accounts more often. Stopped by to fix the bathroom tap. Helped carry the groceries when her back was acting up. Gave Nell a ride to swim lessons. On a Tuesday I was in Fort McMurray. And my wife had a late shift overlap. All reasonable. All things a good person does for the family of a good friend. I registered each one and filed it under exactly that, and kept moving. The Fort McMurray project had me on site 3 weeks at a stretch, and I did not have the bandwidth for a suspicion I couldn't confirm. The contract in January was scheduled for 3 weeks and got extended to 5. I was living in a work camp, eating whatever the cafeteria had put out, sleeping through the particular quiet of a bunkhouse, full of people too tired to make noise. My wife and I did our nightly calls, 10 minutes, sometimes 15. Starting to feel like checkboxes more than conversations. She always sounded tired. I sounded tired too. I told myself that was just what 7 years of marriage with a small child and demanding jobs looked like up close. And that we'd get a weekend, somewhere in the spring. And things would feel different. Mid-February, we hit a ground blizzard on site. 2 solid days of zero visibility. You can't run equipment in that. You send the crew home and wait for Environment Canada to give the clear. My site lead told us to bank the days and come back Thursday. I didn't call my wife from the highway. I don't know exactly why. Some instinct I hadn't given a name to yet. I pulled off the highway 2 blocks from my house at 2:20 on a Tuesday afternoon, parked in front of a neighbor's driveway. Walked up the back alley, came in through the side gate with my key. We'd always kept a spare there for recycling days when we forgot to move the bins out. The back door was unlocked. The house smelled like garlic. Like something had been cooked in the last hour. And there on the front hook, the row of coat hooks my wife and I had installed ourselves with a YouTube tutorial, and 3 arguments about stud finders, was a jacket. Dark green North Face shell, tall man's cut. I'd had the interior label embossed with his initials at MEC, on Chinook Trail, because I thought it was a nice touch for a birthday present. I stood there for maybe 15 seconds. Upstairs was quiet. A television faintly, from the back bedroom. I took out my phone, photographed the jacket from 3 angles, front panel, interior label, timestamp visible in the frame. Then I walked back out the door I came in, locked it behind me, went back to my truck, and drove to the Tim Hortons on McLeod Trail. I sat in the parking lot for 2 hours, ordered a large coffee, barely touched it. The drive-through lineup built and shrank 3 times whilst I sat there, and the sky went from gray to dark, and I processed what I was doing, in the way I process every large problem, which is to say slowly, and thoroughly, and without letting myself rush to the next step, before the current one is fully understood. I didn't call anyone, I didn't cry. I had the particular feeling of confirmed suspicion, which is not the same as surprise, more like a door swinging open onto a room you already knew existed. I drove to a hotel near the airport, texted my wife that the site weather hold was extended. She sent back a sad face emoji and said she missed me. I said I missed her too. It was the last lie I told her. The next 4 weeks were the most focused I have ever been in my adult life. My work has given me a particular skill set: timeline construction, evidence documentation, risk assessment, pattern identification in large and messy datasets. And I turned all of it inward. I started with our joint account. We'd been on a shared credit card for household expenses for years, with a budgeting spreadsheet my wife maintained because she liked tracking things. I went back 8 months. Hotel charges in the south end of the city, on nights I was away. A mid-range Marriott twice, a different property once, the kind of place you book when you want somewhere decent. But nowhere you'd run into anyone you know. A restaurant on 4th Street SW, twice. Evenings on nights that matched working late in her texts. A charges at a spot I recognized as being near his brewery, 3 separate Saturdays when I'd been on site. Nothing dramatic, under $1,000 total. The cost of what it represented was something else entirely. I pulled our family phone plan usage summary from our carrier account online. I couldn't see message content. I want to be clear about that. I could see frequency and timing, between her number and his. Every night I was in Fort McMurray. Starting approximately 30 to 40 minutes. After our check-in calls ended, the messages would begin. Running until midnight sometimes. 6 months of it, visible on the account summary that neither of us had ever thought to look at. I borrowed a colleague's basement suite, Roland, an engineer currently on a long overseas rotation, who'd asked me to check on his place periodically. I stayed there evenings, moved my truck there, kept my location pinging Fort McMurray through a work device my on-site colleague was holding for me. 2 weeks in, I briefed a family lawyer downtown. Sat across from her with everything printed and organized. She looked at it, asked 10 questions. Told me what I had was clear and that I could move whenever I was ready. I said not yet. I had one more thing I needed to do first. My best friend's investors. I'd made introductions for 2 of them. Engineers from my previous firm who trusted my judgment. One was a family friend who'd put in $20,000, specifically, because I'd told him the investment was sound. I wrote an email to all 4 of them over the course of 2 evenings, rereading it more times than I'll admit before I sent it. Subject line: something relevant to your investment position. I attached the hotel records, the phone usage summary, the photograph of the jacket with his initials visible on the interior label. I wrote it the way I write a project risk memo, factual, sourced, free of editorializing. Here is what I found. Here is when I found it. Here is why I believe it is relevant to your assessment of this business partnership. I am not asking anything of you. I thought you should have the information. I sent it on a Thursday at 9 p.m. and went to sleep better than I had in 2 months. By the following Monday, 3 of the 4 investors had meetings with him. The family friend, the $20,000 one, called me on Saturday morning. He said he didn't want to believe it. I told him he didn't have to believe me. He could ask my best friend to issue a written denial. He said he'd do exactly that. He called me back Sunday night. My best friend hadn't denied anything. He'd called the investors' concerns an overreaction, tried to redirect the conversation, and gotten defensive when pressed. That was enough for the family friend. That was enough for the others too. The investors began exiting within 2 weeks. He called me during the 3rd week. Casual, like we'd talked last Tuesday, asking if I knew what was going on with his people. I recognized the phishing immediately. He wasn't certain it was me yet. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about and asked how the seasonal release was going. He said fine. We hung up. I think that was the moment he began to suspect, but suspicion at that point couldn't do anything useful for him. The brewery went into receivership 40 days after I found that jacket on my front hook. The equipment sale was listed in a local business newsletter I subscribed to for industry news. I came home on a Friday evening 3 weeks into the process. Nell was at her grandmother's for a sleepover. I put my phone face up on the kitchen counter, recording. I placed a printed page on the kitchen table. Hotel charges highlighted, the phone usage summary, the jacket photograph dated and time-stamped. And I sat and waited for my wife to come in from the back deck, where she'd been reading in the last of the evening light. When she saw the page on the table, she went very still. I told her exactly what I knew and in what order I'd found it. She tried 3 things in sequence. First she cried, and I waded through it without saying anything. Then she said I was never home. And I said that was true, and I'd carried real guilt about it, but it had no bearing on the decision she had made, independently and repeatedly for 6 months. Then she went quiet for a long time. Then I read her one message from the phone log. The text sent to his number 3 days into my January contract, timestamp visible. He's gone until the end of the month. Finally. She didn't say anything. I told her the divorce was being filed Monday morning. I told her I had a lawyer's proposal for Nell's custody and schooling arrangement. I told her we could handle this straightforwardly, or she could make it complicated, and I recommended the first option for both our sakes and specifically for Nell's. She left that night with one bag, drove to her sister's place in Airdrie. I locked the door and stood in the kitchen for a while, without turning on any additional lights. Nell came home Sunday morning and asked where Mum was. I said Mum needed to stay at Auntie's for a bit, while we sorted some grown-up things out. She accepted this in the way of 6-year-olds. Not because they don't understand something is wrong, but because they understand they won't get a better answer right now. And asked if we could go look at the axolotls at the pet store. We went and looked at the axolotls for 40 minutes. It helped. Honestly. 2 weeks later I came home from work and found my best friend sitting on my front steps. He'd driven himself there, which told me he'd decided that showing up in person would land differently then. Another call I declined. He stood up when he saw me coming up the walk. His face had the look of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say and knows it won't be enough. He said he was sorry. He said it had been a mistake from the very first moment and he'd known it and hadn't stopped it, and he didn't have a good reason why. I stood at the bottom of my own front steps and looked at him. 14 years. Every important thing I'd had in my adult life I'd been adjacent to. My wedding. The night Nell was born. Him pacing the hospital waiting room and sending me stupid memes so I wouldn't lose my mind. The business loan I signed without hesitating. Because I believed in him without qualification. I said, "You want to know what the worst part actually is? It's not even the marriage. The marriage was already something other than what I thought it was, and I can rebuild from that. The worst part is that I would have done anything for you. You knew that exactly, and you did this anyway." He didn't say anything. I told him not to come back. I went inside. I heard his truck start and pull away from the curb. I have not spoken to him since. The divorce finalized 4 months after filing. Alberta's Matrimonial Property Act is fairly clear, and a documented adultery case affects several of the relevant calculations. I kept the house, Nell's school, her room, her specific organizational system for her collection of stuffed marine animals, all of it intact. My wife's parenting time was structured into the agreement and has been honored. She moved into a condo in the Beltline. I don't know the specifics of her current situation. That's hers to manage. I was promoted in April. Regional director overseeing project portfolios across 3 provinces. The kind of role I'd been building toward for most of my career, without quite letting myself believe it was actually building toward anything. There is a particular quality of energy that becomes available when you stop spending it on things that are costing you without return. I hadn't understood how much of mine had been going there until it suddenly wasn't anymore. I'm not going to tell you. The difficult months were simple. They weren't. There were nights with Nell asleep upstairs and me alone in the kitchen, and the house feeling like a size that didn't fit this specific silence of a space that was designed for more people than are currently in it. I got through those by working, by taking Nell to Kananaskis on weekends when the weather allowed, and by being honest with myself about what I was feeling, without deciding it needed to mean more than it actually did. Last week Nell had her year-end school concert. Grade 1 recorder ensemble. She played with the complete conviction and selective accuracy that characterizes most things she attempts. Fully committed to the performance, somewhat approximate on the suts. I was 3 rows back with my phone up, filming everything. She got turned around on the second song, looked up at her music teacher, found her place, and kept going without missing a beat, like absolutely nothing had happened. Several parents around me laughed. I laughed too. After, she found me in the gymnasium crowd and grabbed my hand the way she always has. Since the first week she could close her fist around a finger, and she said, completely seriously, "Dad, I messed up the middle part." I said, "I know, bug, best part of the whole show." She grinned, and immediately forgot about it, and pulled me toward the refreshment table to make her case for the chocolate chip cookie over the oatmeal raisin. Near the exit doors I saw my wife. She'd come in near the end of the filing, found a spot along the side wall. She looked tired, not in a temporary way, but in the deeper way of someone working through something long. We made eye contact across the gymnasium. She nodded once. I nodded once. Then she turned toward the doors and went through them into the hallway. And that was that. I turned back to Nell, who had secured the chocolate chip cookie, and was eating it with a particular focus of someone who has made a considered decision, and has no regrets about it. Some things, once they break, you don't rebuild. You grieve what they were, and then you build something else somewhere else. And eventually that becomes what you mean when you think of home. I'm still figuring out what that looks like in full. So far it looks like a 6-year-old, who plays recorder with complete conviction. And knows exactly which cookie she chooses, and why. And isn't remotely interested in anyone else's opinion on the matter. That's enough. That is genuinely, completely enough.